You're listening to the Valley Current.
How you been? You just got back from Italy, just in time for Halloween, right?
Wow, just got back from Italy, and what a wonderful trip that was, but just in time for Halloween.
Does it make you want to move to Italy?
You know, in some ways it does, yeah. I mean, we had a great visit, and all those cities, you know, kind of had their own charm. And, you know, Rome, of course, with its just history and culture, and the place comes alive at night everywhere. It's just beautiful. The Colosseum, the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican, all that was a great experience. But I'll tell you, the Amalfi Coast was a beautiful place to visit. Wow. I mean, and you better be in good shape over there, because you're hiking upstairs. There's no, in the places you stay, it's kind of odd. You can't get there in a car, right, or even a scooter or anything. There has to be an element of hiking upstairs.
Right. That's how they stay healthy there.
But
they have a lot of pasta that they have to burn off the calories on, right?
And Tuscany was outstanding. That's just a little, I mean, Tuscany was more of a kind of a reprieve, time to relax, reset the batteries. And then we were fortunate. We got this incredible host. Her and her husband, you know, Italian, made us homemade pizza one night and served us dinner. And it was amazing. Yeah.
Well, I think of it as like Tuscany is a little bit like the wine country, and the Amalfi Coast is a little bit like Stinson Beach and Highway 1. And there are analogies to California and I suppose other parts of the world, but it's a very unique country, and the people generally live to enjoy life and less to work. I think they more sort of work to live as opposed to live to work. And they certainly know how to eat, and they certainly know how to cook. So what was the best meal? What was the absolute best meal that you had? I'm curious.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, there were some good pizzas, but I'll have to say I had some, there's a few places I had spaghetti and meatballs in Rome that were fabulous. And then I will have to say the top of the list was which I was just surprised. In Florence, I had this risotto, Italian sausage, and leeks. Wow. And it was, everybody kept eating from my plate.
You took the risk of mixing risotto with leeks, and they wanted to keep tasting it, right?
Man, I don't know. There was probably 4 or 5 really outstanding meals. And of course, you know, you just find yourself, even for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just eating cold cuts and sourdough bread. And, you know, I mean, it's just, I'll tell you though, I heard this from a lot of people and it held true for me. I don't know if it was the less of the process, there's no processing in the food or chemicals, but I think a combination of that and the fact that I walked and hiked so much, I've gained no weight in that whole 3 weeks.
Wow, that's great.
My friends, one gained 6, one gained 8, and I didn't gain any.
Well, good for you. You probably feel great now.
Yeah, I'll tell you the one thing we decided, it was a little crazy, but I'm glad I did it. We also visited Cucchiara, and you know, those are 5 little towns and cities next to each other, right?
Right.
And so I think the area was Monterosa. We stayed in Monterosa, and there was this sign that said, hike to the next city.
Yeah.
I think it was to Veranza or something. So me and a friend go, oh, let's just hike. How bad could it be?
20 miles later.
No, it wasn't bad. It was, we saw a sign, which should have been they said for experts only, and it should take you about 2.5 hours. And actually the first 20 minutes or so was like this. I can tell you we did it in about 1 hour and 45.
That's fast. No hiking sticks.
We took the train back.
Yeah, but no hiking sticks, right? You just on your own with a backpack.
We have a pretty funny video of, I'm in pretty good shape from hiking a lot, but it was pretty steep for me even. We have a funny video of my friend Chris behind me trying to talk to me. He's going,
That's funny. That's good. You really enjoyed yourself, and I know you took a lot of pictures, and I know you posted them on Facebook, and they were interesting to watch because it looked like a great time. And we certainly missed you while you were gone, but a lot of interesting stuff happened, including one thing that I thought you would be interested in, which is on Halloween, there was a jury verdict in a big case, although it's not for the entirety of the United States. It's just for 3 different states in Missouri as well as Illinois and one other state, a class action case of like 250,000 sellers of real estate claim that they were effectively taken advantage of by a monopoly that centered around the National Association of Realtors, which of course is kind of a nonprofit association, and a bunch of different real estate firms that fix their commissions at typically 5 to 6%. And the storyline is something you've been saying for a while, which is, how is it 5 or 6% for the kind of work that certainly the buyer's agent doesn't do very much to earn often 2.5 to 3% on what can be a $2-3 million sale, which is a big commission. It could be like a pretty substantial commission, $30,000, $60,000, $90,000, depending on how many millions.
Yeah, I briefly read through it, and I'm excited to talk to you about it because we've been talking about this for at least 5 or 6 years, if not more. And the one thing that stuck out at me when I read that article too was, which is clear, the one thing that sticks out is that the other issue, if I'm not mistaken, Jack, is unless you're on the MLS or unless you're a realtor, they have the ability to push out and not give the same advantages to people that may not be a licensed realtor or may not be a part of the National Association of Realtors.
Right. It's essentially, the argument is it's essentially a cartel. It's essentially no different than OPEC with respect to oil nations that are part of OPEC can control prices. They're basically saying this association groups together members who agree tacitly, if not explicitly, that they're going to fix their prices at 5 to 6%. Typically 6, and maybe they negotiate to 5, and sometimes they negotiate to 4 if it's a dual agency situation where there's both seller and buyer agent is the same firm. And what I was thinking about is 1.78 billion in damages is not really the total tab, because this can be trebled under the Sherman Act, which is the Antitrust Act. So really trebling this is going to produce like a $5.5 million outcome, plus attorney's fees, plus interest.
Right.
So it's a huge number. I don't know how these businesses that stayed in the case, a bunch of them settled before it went to trial. I don't know how they can stay in business if that judgment is affirmed. It's a huge, huge amount of money if you look at what the total is, right?
It is. It's like anything. It'll play out in court for the next couple of years. But I've been following this, as you know, for several years. This to me is really the first significant, stake in the ground for the consumer against these actions, the way this market is fixed in relationship to real estate commissions.
Right. You would say, and you've been saying for a while, if market forces applied, there would be a true negotiated outcome and things would get a lot more streamlined. Bundle Select was all about streamlining. And this stuff can be streamlined. And to some degree, it's sort of headed in the direction of streamlining, you could argue, because most buyers will not even go to a broker. They'll go to Zillow or they'll go to one of the other online services to see what's out there.
Yeah.
Right?
I could tell you, Jack, the other thing that I could prove, and it would be difficult proving it, of course, but I know it happens, and it happens on a regular basis. I'll give you an example. Say, national part of the association, so they're a realtor, they pay their fees, they're part of the National Association of Realtors. They list a home. Okay, they list a home, And then they get some offers, right? Let's say they get 5 or 6 offers. Well, let's say one of those offers is from a non-participating realtor. They have their license, but they're not part of that association.
Right.
I know for a fact, even if the price was the same or better, they'll find a way to push that offer out because they don't want them to participate.
Right. It's part of the cartel. It's like saying you're not a member of the cartel, so we don't care.
Right.
We're going to ignore it. I mean, I tell a story that people laugh at. I tried to make an offer without an agent in Palo Alto, California, for a home. And the seller's agent looked at me like I was crazy. I said, look, I'm a lawyer. I know how this paperwork works. I don't need to pay. And basically, the seller doesn't need to pay. So just treat it as the seller is going to keep whatever gravy he's saving here. And she looked at me like, things don't work that way. Now, this was a number of years ago. I don't know if the same thing would apply today, but I felt like this is crazy. You're forced. I mean, she was like, I could find somebody else in my office. I mean, obviously it was greed and not the practicality of what's in the best interest for the seller or what's in the best interest for the buyer. So I'm just wondering, and that's why I thought we'd spend this time, because this is late breaking news here. There were 260,000 homes in Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois. The case basically batched together those 3 states. That's just 3 of 50 states, and they're not the biggest states, and they're not the most expensive real estate. But it's 250. You could kind of reverse engineer roughly if it's 260,000 homes, and it's basically let's call it $2 billion. It could be as much as trebled, and with attorney's fees, perhaps become $6 billion. And it was just 6 or 7 years from 2015 to 2022. So the statute of limitations in a Sherman Act case allows it to go back a ways. I'm just wondering if this is the precedent. Inevitably, there are going to be more cases filed in California and Oregon, and maybe a national class action case for the other 47 states. That's got to have the potential effect of bankrupting the whole industry, if you think about it logically, right?
It's coming. It's coming. And I think, it could be, and I now know of them, there's quite a few conglomerates, but I could see now that this, the stake is in the ground, so to speak, and the first shoe to fall here, I believe that you'll likely see there, the real estate companies are scrambling around to find out, because you're right, Jack. The lawsuits will be coming now since this has taken place across the nation, specifically in expensive places like New York, California, places where real estate really, I mean, you're talking about a lot of money. And I do believe that because of this, I'm not, maybe not this year, maybe next year. I would think that in the next couple of years, let's keep an eye on massive consolidation in this real estate industry because of this. I don't know if some of the even middle-sized or big players could handle this financial strain with these lawsuits.
Well, you could see the smaller guys all settled out. They have a list of the smaller people who settled, like the smaller companies who just basically said, hey, we can't be in this thing. We've got to settle. Corcoran was one of them. A few others settled for relatively small money, like Remax paid. I'm sure they'd have a sigh of relief. They paid $55 million. Anywhere paid $83 million. There's a bunch of others that basically settled. I guess Remax and Anywhere Real Estate have brands like Century 21, Coldwell Banker, and Corcoran. I thought those were all separate companies. But the Berkshire Hathaway company stayed in, as did the association. And I was kind of surprised that even Zillow's stock went down by some 7%, and Redfin went down, because those are kind of the streamliners that are out there that are aiding this digital transformation. And yet, I guess the view is most of the customers are licensed real estate brokers, right?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I'd have to read this closer. Did 2 of the biggest real estate companies, holdings right now, I think one is EXP. Did I see, was EXP in here mentioned? And then second is Realogy, who is a parent company of several real estate companies. I thought I saw Realogy in there.
Yeah.
EXP has over 80,000 real estate agents. but maybe their model's a little bit different. So I'm not sure. I don't remember seeing EXP mentioned in here.
No, I didn't see it mentioned. I was specifically looking for it, but I'll get the full complaint because obviously it's just three states. It's about 40,000 transactions a year to come up with, 260,000 total transactions across three states. I would imagine Illinois is probably the bigger state with more transactions than Kansas or Missouri. But the case was tried in Missouri in federal court. And, maybe it's even a subset because it says people who objected to the commissions, they were obligated to pay, because most people just close a transaction. They don't write a separate letter that says, hey, I object to these commissions. That's a rare event to go forward with the deal, but say, well, I object to the commissions. I mean, obviously a seller, every seller that's out there is going to now object to the dual commissions, because the argument really is the fair commission is just the sell side commission. And if the sell side agent wants to share a portion of that 2.5%, maybe that's okay. Like they can do that as kind of a affiliated deal, but even that might be questioned on some view that that's cartel-like activity, right?
Yeah, I think another piece of this, Jack, which has really bothered people for years, is the concept that why is this the burden, the financial burden on the seller, right? So if you list someone's house, traditionally the way the market and the model works right now is the seller is paying 5 or 6%. They're paying all the freight. So the question also has come up a lot is, why isn't the buyer on the hook technically for some of this? Why is it the seller that has to take the brunt of this hit?
Yeah, well, that's the question, right? I mean, that's a good question, because in a streamlined transaction, I think you'd have no brokers and no agents. Now you'd say, well, who's going to list? Who's going to do the photos? I think a lot of that can be automated, and a lot of that is getting automated, right? I think
when more AI and I think I have to believe when blockchain becomes more mainstream, Jack, it really has the potential to change the whole line of this real estate transaction when it comes to title, appraisal, and everything.
Right. I mean, over and over again, you were getting to the point where there's what's generally been called disintermediation of every intermediary who's not really adding value. So if the intermediator is not doing something that is being delegated to them, in the case of selling a house, you would say there is a lot of checklist items, making sure that the house meets code, making sure that there's inspections. There's probably 100 things that a seller's agent would say that the seller will do and the agent will do, and mostly the agent will do. Of course, with a bevy of other people. And there are some sellers, brokers who do actually some fix-up work. They literally have a crew that comes in to paint and to, stage and to do a bunch of stuff. So there's value add there. There's real value add that has real cost. Now, whether you can unbundle that, you could argue there's an unbundling process going on here, where in the ideal world, it should be subject to selection, where the seller says, I just want you to create an ad and I'll pay you 1% for the ad and put it online, where 1.5% gets you a photo.
I'll take it even deeper. I know we're talking about real estate, but this is my industry as too. So someone would say, Joe, are you crazy? Uncovering this information, but the reality is anybody could see it. So we're talking about the real estate piece, and I would say, as an exercise on this podcast, why don't we just quickly, and I could be off a little bit, but I've done this for so long. If we quickly look at $1 million sell, so let's say someone lists a home for $1 million, and so let's talk about the real estate piece. So that's at 5 or 6%. There's $50,000 or $60,000 there, right?
Right, correct.
And then, again, because I'm familiar with this, then if you look at the lending side, let's say they borrow 20% And let's say that 20%, they have a loan of $800,000. Okay?
Right.
So I know for a fact with Fannie Freddie, because everybody's got their hands in their layers and everybody has to make money. I don't know if most people will understand this, but I can tell you in the average Fannie Freddie loan,
right,
there's 400 to 500 basis points built in to divvy out for the parties.
Right.
So 400 basis points on an $800,000 loan, what's that? 32,000, right? Roughly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you get 32,000, and then let's talk about title and escrow. And I know that varies between states,
right?
But you got 4 or 5. Let's just call it California because I'm familiar with it. And on a transaction like that, Jack, you have $4,000 to $5,000 minimum in title and escrow fees.
Right.
So you do some quick math. $1 million home is costing someone somewhere down the line close to $100,000 in fees.
Yep. It's not cheap.
And I know that's a little vague, and someone might say, well, wait a minute, Joe, that mortgage, there's so many people to get paid and this and that. I understand that, but the point we're discussing is if you take a transaction and you could streamline it and you really figure out where the hard costs are versus the fluff, what could be done would be, remarkable. And honestly, like the appraisals is another thing.
Right.
And I know you do need someone to physically visit the site because there could be some elements of, damage that you don't know about. I get that part. But other than the physical inspection, I guess is what I'm saying, there's enough automated information and AI to really get an accurate valuation of that property.
Right. So this is probably, is going to happen because your point, well taken, is this digitization of the industry is continuing. And there are firms like EXP that are completely virtual. They have no brick and mortar, no offices. So they're completely believing in the digital world. And inevitably that drives the cost down. And as you drive the costs down, people start to ask, well, how much profit are you making? And can you negotiate? And the key item that I read in the more legalistic report about this case was that the judge overruled the defense request that a podcast, a video version of a podcast, be disallowed because the podcast had some very racy language in it where somebody from the NAR said something like, hey, if people want to negotiate the real estate stuff down, you should just tell them to, screw you. We'll just not represent you. So it was kind of like a real statement. I mean, there's a derogatory statement about it. I'll see if I can find it. But basically the judge said, look, that's an admission. I'm going to let that play to the jury. I'm sure that must have frosted the case because that video, which apparently hadn't been disclosed in discovery, shows a podcast interview with an executive of Berkshire Hathaway suggesting brokers use crude language and profanity when responding to requests to reduce their commissions. I mean, can you imagine how the jury reacted to that?
Wow.
And of course, that's Berkshire Hathaway. That's Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, who must be just shaking his head. Is nothing sacred anymore? Anything we now say on a podcast can be used against us. Anything that any of our people say on a podcast can be used against us. I mean, they're going to clamp down now. There probably won't be any podcasts anymore from Berkshire Hathaway, and certainly not on the subject of commissions, right?
Right.
But one piece of evidence can really change the course of a case. Not that it would have. I mean, initially, just to footnote this, initially there was a request to arbitrate because these agreements typically have arbitration clauses in them. And they typically have waiver of class actions, and the judge refused, saying this is a public policy issue for a group that's represented by a class representative. And we got to get to the heart of whether or not there was cartel behavior, which is not within the ambit of a typical transactional arbitration clause in a purchase and sale agreement. So as much as the lawyers maybe wanted to engineer a way to avoid this outcome, there was essentially 7 years worth of liability that was captured by this verdict for just 3 states. So I imagine we're going to see a pile-on effect now in every state and maybe on a nationwide basis as well.
Well, this is significant. It really is. I mean, we've been following this for a long time. It's really going to open the floodgates for other states to jump on. And I would say this, the other thing for those listening to this podcast, only again, because I've been in the middle of this for 25 years and I have a good understanding of what happens behind the scenes. I'll take this to another level. So I would say this is that the reason why the commission structure, is still in place, which a lot of people would argue it's an archaic system, is because of our politicians and the lobbyists that control the decisions here. And so I'll explain that.
Right.
Most people don't know this, and it might surprise you, but the National Association of Realtors spend more money lobbying Congress and the House than, wait for it, than the pharmaceutical industry.
Wow.
I don't think most people understand that. So the lobbying power behind the National Association of Realtors is they're spending a lot of money trying to protect this archaic kind of historic structure that's in place. And I'll just finish this and get your comments, Jack. The other piece of the housing finance and sale and buy is the insurance. Well, most of us know what insurance companies do. So title insurance is the other strong lobbying body. And I would say that because of this, most people know that now, because the lending business is not as strong, it doesn't have such a strong lobbying body. This is why you could go to hundreds of places online to get super competitive rates, because you have an advantage to do that. And think about that. The 3 pieces of a transaction, lending, title, and the physical real estate part, it's tougher to negotiate for real estate and title fees today than it is the other part of it, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it makes sense. And your whole reason for creating Bundle Select was to enhance the streamlining and lower the overall costs. And I think you really were the brainchild and still are the brainchild of that, which is why in many ways your convictions from really like 10 years ago when they originated, 10 plus years ago, maybe even longer than that, they're now playing out. You were a visionary and you're ahead of your time. In this case, in many ways, is kind of praise to you that you saw this train leave the station like a decade ago. And it's going to continue. It's going to build more and more steam because you got blockchain, you got AI, you got a bunch of stuff that's playing out. My final question is, will this now extend beyond residential real estate to commercial real estate, where, again, the buy-side agent often doesn't do a lot of work and often ends up getting a ginormous commission, typically negotiated a little more because commercial parties have more power to negotiate. But still, in many ways, there are these associations that do, on the commercial side, some similar things. I'm not going to say identical, but there's similar things where it's kind of a club. And the club does certain things because everyone is scratching each other's back. And that's kind of the nature of what's being challenged here. So we'll see if that plays out. I have to tell you, if it plays out, we're going to see a revolution happen. And I'm not sure Congress is going to be that, at least the fractured Congress that we have, is going to be so ready to do some sort of antitrust exemption around these associations, because in many ways, the people are speaking loudly that they want to see some change happen, change that you envisioned over a decade ago. Really, that change that's happening.
That is interesting. You bring up the commercial side. I didn't think about that. You're bringing in a whole different element now, and honestly, even more money involved, right? I mean, commercial is.
I mean, it's an interesting time, I think, in America that we see so many things happening at the same time that are converging towards the role of an intermediary is radically changing. All intermediaries across the board, including lawyers, accountants,
right,
everyone. And more, it's the intermediaries got to figure out how they will add value of substance to the deal to justify whatever their fee will be. And I got to believe you're right. Title companies are looking at this and saying the same thing. They have title associations that are doing all this lobbying, and they're going to say the same thing. When do we get hit with the next class action case? I mean, I have to tell you, it's a great time for a class action lawyer, because the very final observation I'll make, if this thing gets upheld and it gets to the point of $6 billion, this little tiny law firm in Missouri will probably get a contingent fee of like $2 billion. I mean,
wow.
maybe it's like 10 partners. It could be bigger, but imagine that payday for if the money's actually paid, because I think obviously a number of these companies could just file for bankruptcy and say, this knocked us out. And of course, they'll restart a new business with maybe a different set of rules and a different approach. But, they take a lot of risk in bringing these cases. They obviously have to carry on the litigation for a long period of time. I'm not begrudging them, but it's quite a payday if they ever get to a real payday. Now, of course, they've already gotten a payday from the settling parties, so a lot of money's already come in. So any closing remarks, Joe, about this?
Yeah, I think the one thing, if you want to take a couple of minutes, a little bit familiar, but on the East Coast, right, they have the signing, the attorneys do the escrow, or isn't that correct? I know it's different, title and escrow out here and some strange things. I think on the East Coast in some states, it's different that way. And so I don't know. I don't think that changes the real estate piece we're talking about, but somewhere down the road too, I don't know how that varies or changes the dynamic of a real estate transaction.
Right. The Bar Association in New York and New Jersey and elsewhere, mostly East Coast states, they force a lawyer to be involved in a residential transaction. And that changes the pricing, because the legal fee is really an extra fee. Now, they would say they want to make sure that there's a willing buyer and a willing seller, and there's no fraud, and there's no this, and there's no that. And I haven't seen a study on whether or not the quality of the paperwork ends up really being better than the volume paperwork that's done without a lawyer in California. I just don't know if anyone studied that to see how many lawsuits get filed in one state versus another. There should be, in theory, a lower rate of disappointed buyers or sellers if a lawyer is involved. They should know going in all the risks based on the legal advice they get. But who knows whether it's actually increasing quality of the overall transaction. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the bar in New York and certain other states like New Jersey take the view that you have to have a lawyer, and there's no way out of it. And that could get changed on a similar ground. That's just another cartel. And the cartel is fixing something that doesn't need to be fixed, right?
I'll add, that is right. I'll add one more thing, Jack, before we close out, because it's important. And that is, I'll try to articulate the best I can, because people may not know if they've been part of a transaction. But let me give you another example. I think the best is examples. Someone lists a home, and let's say a real estate agent lists the home.
Right.
And then they say, okay, we're going to start taking offers in a week. Okay.
Right.
So I don't think a lot of people know this. So the real estate agent that's taking the offer, now they do sign a contract and an oath, so to speak, that says they're supposed to entertain all offers and, blah, blah, blah. And I get that. But there's nothing that keeps them accountable to that. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you're listing a house and you get 10 offers. And you go to your seller, the consumer, and say, hey, great news, we got 6 offers or 8 offers. And what I'm saying is this doesn't happen a lot, but there could be some bias, there's some discrimination against certain offers, and no one would ever know. No one would ever know that agent didn't present all 10 of those offers to the homeowners.
Right. Right. It's not, there's a lot of shucking and jiving potential.
Right.
And a lot of ethical issues and a lot of issues that are really about back scratching where the client, in my case, many years ago when I made that offer and the person looked at me like I was crazy, but she said, well, you're a lawyer, so I'll take it. The next call I get from her is, you were outbid. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, oh yeah, you were outbid. I said, was it someone that had a buyer's agent? He said, of course, most people do it that way. I said, so why didn't you call me to see if I would bid higher? She said, no, I can't interfere with the contract. I said, but you had a period of time to basically, and I remember being stunned that this is the way things work. So I said, well, I'm just going to go directly to your client and let them know I was willing to pay $50,000 more, and then you're going to have egg on your face. And she said, well, you can do that, but I'm not going to interfere with the contract. And I did go to the home and knock on the door, and I did see the buyer, the seller, and I did say, I was a buyer for your property. I was willing to pay $50,000 more, but your agent didn't want to talk to me because I didn't have an agent. And the guy looked at me saying, look, I delegated the whole thing to them. I don't want to get in the middle of this. I said, it's your $50,000, And he was like, he was a nice guy. He was like, yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing. I can't just go over their head. I got a contract with them. And I just thought to myself, that's the classic example of, the dumb, fat, dumb, and happy kind of client that is probably not the client that's well informed with Zillow and other internet tools, who would probably say that's an ethical breach and it might be a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty by my agent. She should have told me that you were out there, and we should have created a bidding process, and that house should have gone to the highest bidder, right?
It's ripe for corruption. And I keep saying the last thing, but there's so many layers here. The other thing that happens a lot, which drives me crazy, I'll tell you, and I see it a lot, and again, you can't prove anything, is you'll have a house, this happens, you'll have a house that's sitting on the market and they get no offers, right? So a month goes by and they have no offers. And then all of a sudden your agent goes, well, let's put an offer in on it. And your agent puts an offer, and they call the listing agent. They said, oh boy, we just got 2 other offers today. And they don't have to prove that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
They don't have to prove it.
Right. They can make a lot of stuff up. They can ask their friends to support them. Like there's a lot of back scratching, and it's a sad statement. And obviously the more ethical folks out there would say we never do it, and maybe they don't. And
that's
ultimately,
true. There's some out there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is about a code of conduct and the right thing to do, and put the client first and do all the right things. But I remember doing the math for this guy, and I said, look, I was also willing to waive, at that time it was 6%. I was willing to waive the 3%. I'm not going to act as my own agent and take 3%. You get a net deal at 3%. So on top of the 50,000 more, this house was, I think at the time, $1 million. It's more than 10 years ago. In Palo Alto, of course, you can't find such a house anymore. But I said, look, that's like another 30,000. So this is 30,000 plus another 50. It's $80,000 that you're walking away from. And he was like, yeah, but I'm just not going to change anything. He just wasn't interested. And I remember walking away from that saying, the market is rigged, and this isn't the way things should work. Now, I don't know if it would play out that way now, particularly with this verdict in. Maybe now there's going to be all sorts of new training for real estate brokers and agents about what they should do when someone asks for a negotiated deal. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see if that happens. Obviously, the appellate cycle will be at least another couple of years, and we'll see what plays out over that period of time. But Joe, I want to applaud you because you were a visionary. You saw this coming, and we have like the best example of it in this multi-billion-dollar verdict that was just entered.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how this plays out. I do agree with you. I think this is the floodgates have kind of opened now. You got to believe that the legal system in other states are taking a look at this, right? They got to be taking a look at this and going, what do we do now?
Right, exactly. And the Department of Justice will probably weigh in at some point as well. So the entire industry has to be shaking a little bit in their boots. And certainly it's probably risen to the level of Warren Buffett, even though he's a billionaire. It's a pretty big liability, even for Berkshire Hathaway. So we'll see how they respond to this as well. But thanks, Joe. Welcome back from Italy.
Yeah.
You look great. I'm glad you got a lot of exercise along the way.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack. Good seeing you.
All right. Bye-bye. See you later. Take care.
Tune in next time on the Valley Current.